Brothers and sisters, lean in for a moment. For tonight, we begin with a truth that has traveled across oceans, crossed generations, and now knocks gently upon your heart. Something is stirring among Jamaican workers, something old yet newly awakened, something our elders have felt in their bones for decades. The longing to be seen, to be heard, and to be respected. Not as tools of labor, but as human beings crafted with dignity and purpose. Many of you watching tonight are seasoned souls, guardians of memory, carriers of wisdom. You have lived long enough to witness promise rise and fall, and you know when a wind of change is not merely noise, but a call. And lately, across markets, harbors, sugar fields, kitchens, and construction yards, workers in Jamaica have begun to voice a message that echoes the spirit of earlier struggles. We deserve respect, and we recognize it when we see it. My friends, stay with this story, for it reaches far deeper than politics. It touches the very core of dignity itself. And before we journey into the heart of it all, allow me to say, if you believe dignity matters, do subscribe and stand with us. Brothers and sisters, let us walk slowly into the heart of what has been unfolding across Jamaica in recent months. Not a rumor, not a politician's speech, not a campaign crafted in some distant office. No, what we are witnessing is far older, far deeper, and far more honest. It is the rising voice of workers, ordinary men and women who have carried the weight of the island upon their shoulders for decade after decade. Picture it with me. The early morning heat settling over a fishing bay where men mend their nets by hand. The scent of earth rising from a sugar field where women stoop in the sun, their backs bearing both labor and lineage. The sound of footsteps echoing through a hotel corridor where a housekeeper moves before dawn, ensuring every traveler feels welcomed. Across these places, across these lives, something shifted. A whisper at first, shared quietly during lunch breaks, whispered on minibuses, murmured across churchyards after service. Then it grew into a murmur, and that murmur into a question. Why are we still treated as invisible? For years, workers have spoken in frustration about contracts they never fully saw, promises that never arrived, wages that stretched thinner and thinner while the cost of living climbed higher and higher. Many of you watching right now have lived through every one of those seasons. You remember when farms thrived, when community shops were full, when people lived with a measure of certainty. And you also remember when that certainty began to fade, when global storms and local decisions slowly chipped away at security, leaving many to struggle in silence. But recently, the silence broke. On the docks, older workers gathered after a long shift, their uniforms damp with sweat and sea mist. One of them, a man with silver hair and a steady voice, said, "We have given this island our strength. Why can no one give us respect in return?" His words spread quickly, not because they were dramatic, but because they were true. Truth travels faster than rumor when it comes from the hearts of those who have carried a nation's labor. Across the countryside, farmers who have battled rising fertilizer prices and shrinking market prices began to echo the same sentiment. In Kingston, service workers and drivers spoke with a shared tone, tired, worn, but unbroken. They were not calling for conflict. They were calling for recognition, for dignity, for the simple acknowledgement that those who build Jamaica deserve to be treated as more than hands for hire. Then something unexpected happened. Workers saw footage from another corner of the world, respectful words spoken to farmers, laborers, and soldiers elsewhere. Not empty praise, but genuine recognition of their worth. And that comparison lit a fire in Jamaica. It was not fueled by jealousy nor by politics, but by a memory. The memory of how elders were once regarded and how far the island had drifted from that path. In churches across the island, elders began discussing the same theme during fellowship. They said, "Respect must be the foundation of every leader's duty." In community centers, retired teachers reflected on the decades they dedicated to building Jamaica's future, asking quietly, "Has the nation forgotten those who built its past?" The momentum grew. Radio call-in shows filled with voices of taxi operators, farmers, cleaners, hotel staff, and shop attendants. Not shouting, not accusing, simply telling their stories and asking the country to listen. And for the first time in a long time, Jamaica listened. Something about their tone, calm, tired, sincere, made the nation pause. But amid this rising chorus, one message echoed louder than the rest. All we want is respect. All we want is dignity. That message traveled from parish to parish, from workplace to workplace, shaping a collective moment unlike anything Jamaica has seen in many years. And yet, my friends, this was just the beginning. Because the moment workers found their voice, other groups began to pay attention. Media houses, political circles, and even neighboring islands across the Caribbean. The question was no longer whether workers would speak. It was what would happen now that they had spoken, openly, boldly, and without fear. And so, brothers and sisters, a door has been opened. But what waits on the other side is far more dramatic than anyone expected, brothers and sisters. When a people finally find their voice, the world around them does not sit still. And so it was in Jamaica. The whispers of workers, once small and scattered, began to roll like a tide across the island. The murmur turned into discussion, the discussion into debate, and the debate into something far more powerful, a movement of dignity. It began on local radio. Early morning shows that once spoke mostly of weather, roads, and cricket scores suddenly found themselves flooded with callers. Taxi drivers, market vendors, dock workers, security guards, retired teachers, each one stepping forward with a calm but unwavering courage. They were not loud, yet their truth carried weight. We want dignity. We want respect. And we see examples elsewhere of how workers should be treated. Some callers mentioned scenes they had watched online, scenes of leaders speaking directly to farmers and laborers, acknowledging their pain, thanking them for their sacrifices, and promising to stand beside them. One elderly Jamaican farmer described the moment as a reminder of how leaders used to speak to us when our grandparents were alive. It became a national talking point, a reference the media could not ignore. In fact, by the end of the week, commentators were describing it as the new Ibrahim Traoré moment for Caribbean workers, a point of comparison that ignited hope, but also stirred deep questions. Across workplaces, the reaction grew even stronger. Hotel staff gathered after shifts, still in their uniforms, holding conversations they once feared having. Some spoke of rising workloads without rising wages. Others shared how many years they had served without ever once hearing their contribution recognized by employers or officials. Some cried softly, not from anger alone, but from the aching relief of finally being heard. In the industrial sectors, dock workers, warehouse handlers, and transport staff began meeting in larger groups than before, not to strike, not to protest, but to talk, to reflect, to realize they were not alone. Jamaican culture has always valued resilience, yet resilience without recognition becomes silent suffering. And for the first time in a long time, these men and women were refusing to suffer in silence. Community elders added fuel to the conversation. In churches across Montego Bay, Savannah Lamar, May Pen, and Port Antonio, Sunday services carried a familiar but newly charged rhythm. Pastors reminded congregations of the biblical principle: a worker is worthy of his hire. Retired masons, fishermen, teachers, and shopkeepers nodded with a knowing heaviness. They felt these words in their bones. Soon after, the media responded. Newspapers published long articles exploring the sudden wave of worker testimonies. Evening talk shows invited union leaders, employers, economists, and community activists. The nation began to grapple with difficult questions. Have we undervalued our labor force? Do we rely too heavily on imported ideas while ignoring the needs of our own people? Why did it take this long for workers to be heard? As this conversation grew, the political class felt the tremor beneath their feet. Some officials tried to downplay the movement as emotional or temporary. Others attempted to redirect the narrative toward global economics, inflation, or external pressures. But the public did not shift. Because this moment was not about global conditions. It was not about political positioning. It was about dignity, something deeper, something moral. Youth groups reacted next. Many young Jamaicans, often criticized for being disengaged, suddenly found themselves intrigued. They began watching documentaries, speeches, panel discussions from the African continent. They asked their parents and grandparents how leaders used to treat communities in earlier decades. The youth saw a contrast that unsettled them, a contrast between true service leadership and bureaucratic indifference. And then the Caribbean joined the conversation. Trinidadian radio shows debated whether their workers faced the same challenges. Barbadian commentators wondered aloud whether respect for workers across the region had been slowly eroded by decades of economic hardship. St. Lucian newspaper opinion pieces warned that if Jamaica's workers rise, the entire region will follow. For the first time in many years, the Caribbean felt united by a single moral question. Why have workers, the backbone of every economy, been forgotten for so long? But brothers and sisters, let us be clear. When truth rises, power trembles. Behind closed doors, in Kingston boardrooms and governmental offices, a quiet unease spread. Leaders understood that this was not a passing wave. This was a shift in consciousness. And when consciousness shifts, politics must follow, willingly or unwillingly. Yet even as the island buzzed with voices, something much bigger was forming beneath the surface. Because when dignity is awakened among workers, changes begin to ripple across unions, industries, families, and national identity itself. And that, my friends, is exactly where the true storm began to gather. For what came next was not expected by politicians, employers, or even many workers themselves. Brothers and sisters, when a movement begins in the hearts of workers, the consequences do not politely wait their turn. They arrive like rain in the wet season, sudden, heavy, and impossible to ignore. And so it was across Jamaica. Once the voices of laborers, farmers, drivers, shop attendants, and hotel staff rose together, the island did not merely listen. It began to shift. The first tremor was seen in the unions. For years, union branches had struggled with dwindling influence. Their meetings attended mostly by older members who held on to memories of earlier decades when workers negotiated with stronger unity. But now, halls that once echoed with emptiness found themselves filled again. Younger workers, who had long believed collective action could change nothing, walked into these meetings for the first time. They did not arrive with anger alone. They arrived with clarity. They said, "If respect is possible elsewhere, then we deserve it here too." Union leaders were surprised by this awakening. Some confessed privately that they had not felt such energy in many years. They realized they could no longer rely on political alliances or vague promises. Workers wanted transparency. They wanted proof. They wanted to know where funds were going, how decisions were made, and why so many negotiations had been quietly stalled. The demand was simple but powerful: honesty. The second consequence unfolded in the business sector. Hotels, factories, and logistics companies suddenly found their workers discussing not only wages, but also conditions, training, promotion opportunities, and the culture of how employees were spoken to. Some managers were caught off guard. They had grown accustomed to silent compliance. Now, instead, they encountered calm, confident voices saying, "We are essential to the success of your business. Treat us as such." A few employers responded defensively, but others, especially those who had themselves grown up in humble communities, listened with humility. They remembered their own parents and grandparents laboring quietly, often disrespected, yet never complaining. Those memories softened them, and gradually, in certain workplaces, genuine dialogue replaced tension. The third ripple appeared in the Jamaican household itself. Families gathered at dinner tables discussing worker dignity, something rarely spoken of openly in previous years. Elders reminded the young, in our time, respect was not luxury, it was foundation. Grandmothers shared how they once carried baskets of produce miles to market with heads held high, because dignity was the one treasure no hardship could steal. Now, hearing today's workers rise for respect stirred an old fire within them. Even schoolchildren noticed. Teachers reported that students were asking new questions. Why do some jobs get honor while others do not? Who decides whose work is valuable? These innocent questions carried truth sharper than any political commentary. They revealed a generational hunger for fairness. Meanwhile, across the island's churches, pastors and elders began holding special evenings dedicated to the dignity of labor. Scriptures were revisited. Hymns took on deeper meaning. Congregations prayed not for wealth alone, but for justice, for fair treatment, for honor to return to the hands that feed the island. And then came the international consequence. A whisper at first, then a wave. Caribbean scholars, commentators, and diaspora leaders in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom began examining Jamaica's awakening. Online discussions multiplied. Articles were written. Comparisons were made. Some analysts highlighted the extraordinary Ibrahim Traoré reaction, pointing out how Caribbean workers, for the first time in many years, felt they had a clear example of what respect for labor could look like in practice. This comparison did not create envy. It created clarity. Elders in the diaspora called family members back home, saying, "We have watched you suffer in silence long enough. Stand firm. We support you." Jamaican nurses working overseas told their relatives, "Remember your worth. Your labor holds the island together." The diaspora became amplifiers, echoing the message of dignity across thousands of miles. And yet, brothers and sisters, with every movement comes resistance. Political strategists, business interest groups, and certain media commentators began warning of instability, economic risk, and dangerous expectations. But the workers of Jamaica had grown wiser. They responded, "We are not asking for conflict. We are asking for fairness." Their calmness unsettled those who preferred the old order. The largest consequence, however, was spiritual. something in the national psyche shifted. The island remembered its roots, the resilience of Maroons, the fire of Garve, the dignity of ancestors who labored under the harshest conditions, yet never surrendered their humanity. Jamaica remembered who it was, and remembering, brothers and sisters, is the beginning of transformation. But this transformation has opened the door to a profound question, one that Jamaica can no longer avoid. Do you believe Jamaica is truly ready for leaders who treat workers with the dignity they deserve? For if the island is ready, then the next wave of consequences will extend far beyond economics or politics. They will reshape identity, purpose, and destiny. Brothers and sisters, when a small island begins to rise in dignity, the world does not look away. It watches, it listens, and sometimes it trembles. Jamaica's awakening was no longer a domestic matter. It had slipped quietly into the corridors of international attention, carried by analysts, journalists, and diplomatic whispers. Across the ocean, in the United States, think tanks began publishing cautious reports. They noted that Jamaica's workers were speaking in a unified voice not heard in many decades. Some analysts praised the movement as a long overdue correction, a natural desire for fairness. Others, more guarded, warned policymakers that rising worker consciousness in the Caribbean could reshape labor negotiations, migration patterns, and even political alignment. Television networks in Washington invited Caribbean scholars to discuss what dignity-driven labor movements might mean for the region. One commentator remarked, "Jamaica is rediscovering the worth of its people. That is powerful. That is unpredictable." Another responded, "When workers learn their value, they become harder to exploit." And in that simple sentence lay a truth many were hesitant to say aloud. Meanwhile, London newspapers carried thoughtful op-eds about the island's shift. Some writers expressed admiration for the clarity and moral force of Jamaican workers. Others worried aloud that if dignity became a central political issue, old trade and diplomatic assumptions might no longer hold. After all, a people who rediscover their self-worth seldom return to silence. In Ottawa, policy analysts described Jamaica's movement as part of a broader global pattern. From Africa to South America, workers in developing nations were beginning to question systems that had long extracted labor while returning too little honor. Jamaica, they suggested, was becoming a symbolic reminder that even small nations can spark large conversations. But it was not only Western powers who watched. African commentators, especially from Ghana, Kenya, and Senegal, spoke with deep pride. They saw in Jamaica's workers the same spirit that had fueled movements across their own continent, a refusal to be invisible. Some African broadcasters even dedicated entire segments to celebrating Jamaica's moral resurgence, reminding viewers of the historical ties that bind the two regions. They said, "When Jamaica rises, Africa feels it. When Africa rises, Jamaica feels it." In the Caribbean itself, the reaction was equally powerful. Trinidadian commentators wondered whether their own labor force might soon voice similar concerns. Barbadian economists debated whether Jamaica's stance could inspire regional reforms. St. Lucian pastors delivered sermons urging citizens not to fear dignity, but to embrace it as a divine right. And yet, brothers and sisters, amid all these perspectives, one truth was becoming unmistakable. Jamaica's internal awakening had become an international conversation about fairness, respect, and leadership. But as global attention intensified, one question grew louder, whispered in meeting rooms from Kingston to Washington. What will Jamaica do next? Because the world can watch, the world can comment, the world can analyze, but only the island itself can decide its path. And so, my friends, the real test was not the world's reaction, but Jamaica's next step. Brothers and sisters, the road ahead is never built in a single day. It is shaped step by step, choice by choice, heart by heart. And now, with the voices of Jamaica's workers rising in unity, the island stands at a crossroads unlike any it has faced in many years. The question is no longer whether workers deserve dignity. That answer has been spoken clearly. The real question is whether Jamaica is willing to build a future where dignity is woven into every decision. First, the nation must choose whether to listen deeply to its workers, not as employees, but as citizens who have carried the load of the country for generations. In every parish, in every industry, workers have offered testimonies filled not with rage, but with truth. They have spoken of long shifts, rising costs, thinning wages, and a longing to be recognized. But beneath all of that, there is something more powerful: hope. Hope that Jamaica can rebuild its labor culture. Hope that leaders, managers, and policymakers can relearn the sacred principle that a worker's worth is not determined by status, but by humanity. Hope that the island can return to a time when elderly farmers, bus drivers, market women, and craftsmen were treated as pillars of the nation, not just hands for hire. Second, Jamaica must decide how to guide its young generation. For the youth are watching closely. They see their parents and grandparents rising with new courage. They see dignity being demanded and defended. And they will shape the next chapter, for better or for worse, depending on how the nation responds now. If the island plants seeds of respect today, the children of tomorrow will grow with stronger roots. Third, Jamaica must acknowledge that the world is watching. From the United States to Africa, from London to Nairobi, eyes have turned toward the island not out of curiosity alone, but out of recognition. Jamaica's workers have awakened a conversation far larger than themselves. If the nation embraces this moment, it can become a model for the Caribbean, a voice of moral leadership in a world hungry for principles, not just profits. Fourth, Jamaica must remember its own history: the courage of the Maroons, the fire of Garvey, the resilience of its ancestors, the wisdom of elders who endured hardship yet never surrendered dignity. This heritage is not merely memory, it is instruction, a compass pointing toward justice. If the island honors this lineage, the future will not be built on slogans, but on the foundation of its deepest values. And yet, brothers and sisters, the greatest decision lies not in the hands of politicians alone. It lies in the hearts of the people, in the fishermen mending their nets at dawn, in the hotel housekeepers finishing their shifts long after sunset, in the grandmothers praying over their families, in the retirees who have waited decades for fairness. It lies in you. For Jamaica's next chapter will not be shaped by speeches. It will be shaped by choices, quiet, persistent, courageous choices. And so, my friends, the island stands before a door that only its people can open. But beyond that door lies a truth more challenging than anything we have faced so far. And it leads us into the final message of this story. Brothers and sisters, as we stand at the end of this journey, let us take a breath together. Let us look back at the voices we have heard, the truths we have faced, and the dignity we have rediscovered. Jamaica's workers, long overlooked and long undervalued, have risen not with anger alone, but with clarity, with courage, and with a deep remembrance of their worth. What we are witnessing is not a protest. It is a spiritual reawakening. For many years, people have endured hardship in silence, carrying the weight of the island while receiving little honor in return. But now, that silence has broken. Across farms, factories, hotels, and harbors, men and women of every age have stepped forward to say, "Our labor matters. Our humanity matters." And this declaration has reshaped the nation's conversation in ways no policy or campaign ever could. Across the Caribbean and far beyond, observers have noted something extraordinary. They have seen workers drawing inspiration from examples of leadership that treat laborers with respect and humility. Analysts have spoken openly about the Ibrahim Traoré reaction, acknowledging how the dignity shown to workers in other parts of the world has awakened a desire for that same dignity in Jamaica. And my friends, that desire is not a flaw. It is a blessing. It is a reminder of what every society owes the people who build it. This moment, this awakening, has now become a defining Ibrahim Traoré moment for Jamaica, a point where self-worth rises above fear and truth rises above convenience. And as this conversation spreads across the Caribbean, across diaspora communities, across generations, it becomes clear that we are witnessing yet another Ibrahim Traoré moment, not as a political event, but as a moral mirror. A reminder that leadership begins with respect, and a nation's strength begins with its workers. But the future, brothers and sisters, is not written yet. It lies in the hands of those who till the soil, who drive the roads, who mend the nets, who teach the children, and who hold families together through sacrifice. It lies in the hearts of elders who carry decades of wisdom, and in the courage of young people who refuse to inherit silence. So I ask you, do you believe Jamaica can build a future where dignity is not a privilege but a foundation? Do you believe workers deserve honor woven into every corner of national life? If your heart whispers yes, then stand with this message. Speak it, share it. And brothers and sisters, if you believe in dignity, do subscribe and help us keep this conversation alive. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And together, we can help shape the Jamaica that every worker deserves.